Good morning, everybody. How is everybody doing? I'm gonna ask, while I'm introducing myself, I want to ask people to put in the chat box your name and how many years have you been doing permanent supportive housing. So let me start off by introducing myself. I'm Pat Tucker. I reside in Chicago, Illinois, but Washington State is my second home. I just haven't been to my home in a while because of COVID, but I'm hoping to get back there soon. I have done permanent supportive housing for more than 20 years, and there's nothing that you can surprise me with when it comes to permanent supportive housing. I've had some experiences that I can only, it just provides good stories for training. So I'm seeing people are starting to put in the chat box. So Thomas, you've been doing this for a whole 5 months. Woohoo! Colette, over a year. Oh, Sydney, a whole month and 2 weeks. Oh, you were a property manager. Oh, we're gonna have to talk, Sydney, because it's important to wear that different hat now that you're moving over to services. Manager for 1 year. Oh, okay, so we could be switching stories, Sydney. Everybody else, put in the chat box how long you've been doing this along with your name. Just curious how many, how much experience I have in the room. Ramita, 6 months. Okay. All right, so let's get started. Oh, a whole 4 weeks, 5 months. So we got some newbies, 1 to 2 months. So let me ask this question. Do all of you know all of the dimensions of permanent supportive housing? You can write it in the chat box. Nope, don't know. All right, I see it. No, no, nope, 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 don't know. Not yet. And I'm assuming that most of you were told by your supervisors to come to this training, right? To learn about permanent supportive housing. I have a social work, been a peer support for 3 months, okay. So yeah, okay, so you all were told to come to this training to get trained. Okay, are there any people here that came because they want to be Fidelity reviewers? If you want to be a Fidelity reviewer, can you write Fidelity reviewer and yes in the box, in the chat box? Because I don't want to lose track of the people. Okay, so Teresa, you want to be a Fidelity reviewer. You've been doing this for 3 years and you're ready to do reviewing. I got you. Colette, I see you. Teresa, I see you. All right. So I am going to beg the people who really want to be Fidelity reviewers to be patient with me. I'm also asking because we're going to start off next year doing some more Fidelity reviewer trainings that are going to be specifically for people who want to be Fidelity reviewers. I'm apologizing to the people who want to be Fidelity reviewers because it's going to be hard for me to train the new people and to teach the people who have experience to be Fidelity reviewers. I'm gonna try to do a little bit of both, but I think it's gonna be kind of boring for you who really want to be Fidelity reviewers. So just be patient with me. I'm gonna try to do my best to get you as much information as I can. I am going to now share my screen to show, oh, I gotta change names. I still have Amanda's name on here. Sorry, Rayanne, I just noticed that. So I'll get that fixed. All right. So let's jump in. Let's jump into this and get it started. All right. So again, we're gonna skip that. We're gonna skip this. I already have a sense of where you're at on the principles. I do have two things in here that I think would be useful for everybody. If you haven't seen them, please look at them and review them, especially I put in the toolkit. The toolkit is out there for anybody to look at. What I'm going to be talking about today is not a secret. And I recommend, if you don't have the SAMHSA toolkit, that at some point you take a look at it. It is very helpful. It also has lots of information in it that there's no way I could go through all of what's in there in a short amount of time. So I'm actually want to open up the floor. Anybody out there know what it means to be an evidence-based practice? If I'm assuming you can come off mute, or you can write in the chat box. What do you think it means? When you hear evidence-based practice, what does that say to you? Anybody? Oh, let's see. There's some. Go ahead.
This is Thomas. Basically, it's like the idea of like occupational practices, like kind of like they're based off of like evidence, like scientific evidence.
Exactly.
I got it right. Okay, cool. Right.
Exactly. Thank you, Thomas. So basically, when you hear evidence-based practice, it means that there's been research done about this, and the research has shown that it works. So when you see evidence-based practice, just remember that it's all about there has been research done and this works. So when everything that we're talking about, there's been tons of research on it. And the research has shown that, oh, we're in the right track here. So let me just give you some of the basics of what you have to believe in if you are going to be doing permanent supportive housing. And if you don't believe in these, you're going to struggle. I'm just going to be point blank. If you do not believe that clients can make their own decisions, we got a problem. Because guess what? Clients are going to be making their own decisions, whether you like it or not. They will always make their own decisions. We need to acknowledge that and let them make their own decisions. Let's not try to pretend that we have all the answers, because we do not. We need effective partnerships to make this work. I know your job is to help people get into housing and to maintain that housing, right? You can't do that without partnerships. How many people here are experts when it comes to mental health issues? We have any experts in the room? Any experts on substance use or substance use? Any experts? Any experts on therapy? Any experts out there on physical health issues, medications? We don't have all the answers. And one of the things that, if you haven't realized, one of the things you will realize is that when you help people get into housing, in some ways, you're kind of living with them, because what they do in their housing is important to you because that's part of your job, right? Our job is not only to help people find housing of their choice, it's to also help them maintain that housing, stay in it, right? You don't want to help people find housing only to be evicted a month later or to leave it a month later. So we have to treat the whole person. We can't just treat a part of a person. The housing, even though the housing piece is crucial, it's also connected to every other. It's connected to your substance use, it's connected to your mental health. All of that is important in keeping your housing, right? So we can't just treat parts of the person. We need to be working with other people who are working with that participant to make sure that they understand and that they have all the support they need. We also need our job is really to give unbiased information. What do I mean by that? I think we sometimes don't hear what we're saying to people. But if I say to somebody, okay, you want housing. I really think, with your history of substance use, you really should look at recovery housing. Is that unbiased information? It's
No,
not unbiased. Go ahead, say it.
no, that's pretty biased.
It's
That's
pretty biased.
yeah.
I've heard staff do that. I've heard staff make or say to people, well, there are these apartments, but you probably can't afford it. That is not our decision, and that is not the way we should be giving information. We should be letting people know, okay, here are the housing options. You tell me which one sounds best for you. We should not be trying to put our finger on the scale, because basically when you give unbiased information, we're putting our finger on the scale. We're trying to push the person in a direction we want them to go, as opposed to letting them make their decision. Our job is to give information and make sure they understand the information, not to tell them what's the best choice for them. Our job is to be on that bus while they drive the bus. Sometimes we go on some pretty exciting rides on that bus, but our job is to sit there and be in that seat supporting that person. We also have to do individualized plans. You cannot treat me the same way that you treat Thomas, or treat Thomas the same way you treat Colette, or treat Colette the same way you treat Kimberly. We are all different people who are in different places, different spaces, and all might have different needs that we need to address. My plan should be only my plan. It should not be just a plan that you give everybody. It should have some of my own goals in there and my own words, not your words, my words, because it's my plan. It's what I'm striving to do. Am I making sense? All right. So when you're doing permanent supportive housing, there are some key elements that everybody needs to have. That is, everybody should have a lease in their name. Not in the agency's name, not in anybody else's name, but their name. Sometimes it can be in another person's name if somebody has the legal rights to present or to represent the tenant or the client. If somebody has legal powers, they can be, on the lease. I've actually worked with one person who his parent had control over his finances and his life, basically. And so he was not able to legally sign a lease because he had some developmental issues, and therefore his parents signed his lease. That's an exception to the rule, and parents or legal guardians can sign leases when they have to, but the preference is for the participant to sign their lease, because we want that participant to have full rights of tenancy, which means that the only person that can kick out that person out of their apartment is the courts. Landlords do not have the power to evict somebody unless they go through the court system. And the courts are who decides to evict people, not the landlord. I know landlords will threaten eviction, but they still have to go to court. And the judge has to say, this person can be evicted before the person can be evicted. That's important to know, because a lot of times, even the staff are not always clear about how evictions happen. And sometimes the landlord says, I'm going to evict you, and we rush to get our person out of that place and put them somewhere else so they don't get evicted. And that's because we don't know how evictions work. Evictions have to go through court, and the judge has to okay an eviction. It cannot happen any other way. So if a landlord threatens eviction, it's a threat. It means that that landlord may go to court to try to get that person out of their building. We want the leases that people sign to be regular leases. We do not want people to be moving into programs where there are more pages of rules than there are pages to the lease. And I've seen some of those where the person can't have visitors after 8 o'clock at night. The person cannot have overnight guests. The person cannot have, anything in their room, any alcohol in their room. Now, if you're going to a clean and sober program, that might be one of the, there are going to be some stipulations on what you can do and can't do in your recovery house. That's one thing, but we don't want to see leases with unnecessary rules. If you're doing your own housing, you're more likely to put a lot of rules in. And I'm advising against putting in a bunch of rules. And if you're putting in rules, you really should be thinking about, why are we putting in that rule? Is it really necessary? I'm hoping that if you have if your agency has its own housing, that you're not trying to put in a ton of rules to prevent things from happening, because all you're doing is forcing the participants to find ways around your rules. They will find ways around them.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
From my understanding, ultimately, we should be looking for, permanent housing, not necessarily transitional,
Right.
unless that's something that the participant wants, right?
Unless the participant wants transitional housing, we should be, and that needs to be documented. So if the participant says, I want temporary housing, that needs to be documented, but that's not what you get paid to do. This program is permanent supportive housing. So if somebody wants temporary housing, I would be questioning, why did they come to the permanent supportive housing program? Because our job is to find permanent housing that has a lease. Now, we may have to put people into temporary housing until we find a place for them to move to. That's different. That's putting people in housing while you're looking for a place for them to move to. That's okay. But if the ultimate goal is temporary housing, they shouldn't be in a permanent supportive housing program. Because temporary housing is not permanent. You can be evicted, within however many months you're allowed to stay there. Well, the reason we want people to have a lease is, in the past, a lot of programs enforced the lease with services, or basically used services and said, okay, services are going to be a part of your lease, and if you don't engage in services, you can be evicted. We found out that doesn't work, that people will get evicted, and it has nothing to do with the housing. It's because we're putting unnecessary rules in place to force them to work with services. What we're saying is services has to work to establish a relationship with that person. So that relationship with that person is going to be what's going to be crucial to that person being successful. Not, enforcing it in the lease. That's not going to get you that person on board to work with you. The support services are available and accessible, but are voluntary and not required. So you cannot evict somebody for refusing services. Makes it a little difficult, right, to do permanent supportive housing if people don't have to meet with you. I've only had one person who refused to meet with me. And that person, when they refused, I realized something was not right and had to have that person committed because they were a danger to themselves and others. Most people, if you have a good trusting relationship with them, will want you around and want services. So it's yes, go ahead.
I just have a question about this because I manage a veterans program, and all of our units, because it's all supportive housing, and all of our units have what's called a VASH voucher, which I'm sure you know. And part of the VASH program is, I've been told, is mandatory case management. So like they sign a document that if they're going to get their VASH voucher, they have to do case management, or they could lose their voucher. How does that
Well, see, that's interesting, because I've worked with HUD VASH before, and they were always the same as permanent supportive housing, where the services were voluntary. If they're telling you that's the case and there's paperwork for people to sign, then you have to go with people signing off on that paperwork, and it becomes a part of their lease. It still is doing permanent supportive housing, but you're probably not gonna get the same score as somebody else who doesn't have that requirement. So when you do Fidelity scores, your scores can go down if you're not following the model to, as it was written. So by putting that in, you might lose a couple of points on your Fidelity review, but if those are the only couple of points you lose, then you're in great shape. You're still meeting Fidelity.
Well, it's not in our lease, it's in their contract to get their voucher. So if they don't do it, then they lose their voucher, then they lose their,
Right,
the way
so
they pay their rent.
Right, so it's not in your program, but it's a requirement of the funder.
Mhm.
And funders always have requirements. And I think, HUD Vash is trying to make sure that people are not dealing with their issues. It still will influence your score. Well, if it's the funder doing it and people are signing up for it, it doesn't have the same effect, but I would still recommend that staff go to visit people when it's convenient for the participant, not when it's convenient for you. I think that sets off the site visits or your visits to people's homes in a good space. If people feel like you really care about them, they're gonna want you to come and visit them because they know you're thinking about them and caring about them. And that trust means a lot more than a piece of paper saying they have to get services, if that makes sense. Other questions so far?
So this is Teresa. Can I just kind of reiterate what I'm hearing is that you're saying that the face-to-face, that relationship building is kind of a critical component to what we do and to build that relationship with that people more than like the Zoom and the other stuff that we've had to do through the pandemic.
You can't do this. It's hard to do this job in a Zoom meeting or in a phone call. I mean, I'm not saying you can't do some visits that way, but you should try to get to the apartment at least once a month to do it in person. How would you know? I mean, let me ask you this question, and anybody can answer. Why is it important to go to a person's home? Why would you want to go to somebody's home?
Hey, this is Thomas. Because even though they can tell you on the phone, you could look at their living situations to kind of gauge if they are depressed, if they're, if they haven't been like eating properly or, things like that. You not only, because like you said previously, like we are not only supporting like finding them a permanent house, but we want to actually make sure that they're able to maintain that housing.
Exactly. So you only get a sense of people when you're doing a video call. Like I can see you and a little bit behind you, but I can't see your place. I can't see, necessarily if you've put things up on the wall or, or if you've been like some of the places I've gone where you have aluminum foil covering everything in the room. I've been to apartments where people were using aluminum foil to keep people from reading their minds, and it was all over the entire apartment. It's hard to pick that up when you're on a Zoom call, or sometimes people are on Zoom calls and don't show their environment. You have a blank screen that you're talking to. You have no clue of what the person is going through in that apartment. So going to the apartment is really important, at least once a month. And I know it's not easy in the time of COVID. You can wear face masks, you can ask the client to wear a face mask, but you really do want to get out there and see the place. And you want to keep that relationship going. You want to build a trusting relationship between you and that participant. Because when things get tough, that trust is going to be what's going to help that person get through and listen to you and to actually hear what you're saying. We also, other thing is the housing shouldn't be time limited, meaning no temporary housing. It should be based on the lease. So a lease usually gives you 1 year to live in a place. And at the end of that year, you or the landlord can either renew the lease or not renew the lease. But we really want that it's important that the participants in your PSH program feel like their housing is not connected to their wanting to get services, that that they can keep that housing no matter what, as long as they're maintaining their lease, or as long as they're abiding by their lease. If they stop abiding by their lease, they can lose their housing. That's a natural consequence. But most of us don't have, in our apartments, we don't have somebody who says, you have to see me every month. If you don't see me, I'm gonna kick you out. We don't have that, because that puts undue pressure. It forces the clients to either sit there and pretend that they want the services and pretend that they're listening to you, or they just kind of go through the motion and go, yeah, I hear you, and you walk out and they do what they're gonna do anyway. It just sets up a false pretense if we have it that they're forced to talk to us. We still have, even if they're forced to talk to us, we still have to have a relationship and build some trust with that person. We also want to make sure that we are honoring people's choice. I know it's not easy in this day and age to give people choice, but we have to give people full range of choice and let them choose where they want to be. Because if we give people that choice, more than likely, they're going to choose the place that they want to live. Right? If they don't want to live there, what do you do if you move into a place that you don't really care about? Or you move in because it was the only thing you can find. Are you invested in that place? Are you feeling like you want to do whatever it takes to stay there? No. You're like, okay, this is not what I wanted, but it'll do for now. I'll see how long I can make it work. We want people to be invested where they live. We also want one of the options for people to be an affordable option. So when you're looking for housing, we're hoping that one of the choices is affordable. Now, I know it's not easy to find affordable housing. I am not that out of it. I know that it's a hard thing to find. You have to work with landlords. You have to do a lot of dancing and a lot of work to find a place. That makes that relationship of trust even more important, because the worst thing is to help a person find a place, and then they leave and never come back after a month, or they get evicted after 3 months. That's a lot of effort to put into finding a place and finding a landlord that will agree to let them live there, only to have them lose it before 6 months are even up. That's a lot of work. Do you want to keep doing that? If you don't want to keep doing that, then it's important to give them choice of where they want to live. And yes, there are going to be exceptions to the rule. There are going to be times where what they want, they can't locate, or you can't locate. And that might mean that they have to do a more complicated plan. Maybe they move into this one place that you both have found, and they're only going to be there for 1 year. And then they're at the end of that lease, they want to move into the place they really wanted. We have to keep people engaged and not let them feel like they have no other choices but to take this crappy apartment because that was all they can find. We need to keep that hope alive and say, okay, this was the only place we could find. Maybe we do a two-part plan. Maybe you take this place for now and we look for another place. And at the end of your lease, we try to move you into a place that you really want to be at. Am I making sense? We also know, based on research, that people do better when the housing is integrated. If you've never seen public housing, or if you've seen it, you know public housing has a lot of issues, right? Because it's all a bunch of people who are living in poverty and have other issues, and they live together. And many times when a building can take on a life of its own, and it could become one of those buildings where everybody in the building is depressed and really, not hopeful of anything. And you move in anybody and they fall into that same category of hopelessness, and that's not healthy. What we found is that when people are in a community and in a building that some people get up and go to work in the morning, that creates some normalcy, and people do better in those type of buildings that not everybody has the same issue as they do. People have issues, but not all of the issues are the same. That's a normal building, and that means that that building will not, there are going to always be some people who get up and go to work. There are always going to be some people who are not working. That's more normal, and that's more of what the expectation is. And we've seen from research that people do better when they live in a housing apartment that anybody else can live in. It's just, a lot of times people will do better when housing is integrated because they see other people doing stuff. They might think, oh, well, that neighbor is in worse shape than I am, and he's getting up and going to work. Maybe I could do that. We want people to have hope, and we want them to see possibility. If you put them in buildings that everybody has issues, a lot of times they really just get stuck on dealing with the issues and not on themselves. We need to make sure we give the support that people need. In my experience, people moving in that first 6 months need a lot more hand-holding and a lot more support in that first 6 months than they may need in that last 6 months of the lease. So we have to be able to increase our services when the tenant needs more services and reduce it when they don't need as much. So it shouldn't be static, if that makes sense. None of us, some of us have good days and bad days, right? Sometimes you have a good month. Things are going great. I don't need anybody's help. I'm having the best month I've ever had. But the next month might be full of issues. Everything that could go wrong is going wrong, and you need a lot more support. We should be able to accommodate that. That's why you have small caseloads, so we can accommodate that when people need to make changes. We also want to see, we don't want to see the same intensity of services across the whole year, unless that's what the person needs and wants. What do you think the purpose of services are? Why are we giving people services? Why are you doing what you do? What is your goal? Anybody have any ideas about what your goals are? Let me see in the chat box. Oh, are you trying to talk to me, Donna? Are you on mute? You're not on mute. I'm not sure why I can't hear you. Oh, you're on the phone. Kimberly or Rayanne, any ideas of how to help Donna speak to me, or can she not speak because she's on the phone?
She should be able to just go off mute on her phone. I'm not sure why it's not going through.
Yeah, you might want to just double check to make sure that your phone is not on mute. So you're basically saying that, oh, you did that. I'm sorry, Donna. I'm not sure why you can't talk to me. I would love to hear what you have to say. Okay, yeah, you can do it in the chat box. So yes, rental agreements in clean and sober houses are fine. But one of the things you need to make sure of is all of you need to have all of those either rental agreements or leases. You need copies. Because how else would we know if people have leases if you don't have copies of those leases in files or just somewhere to have those leases? So make sure you're asking the participants for a copy of their lease. Also, one of the things that I've noticed is some people lose their leases. And so, when I'm saying, was that in your lease? And they're saying, I don't know what was in my lease. And they say, I don't know where my lease is. I could always pull out a lease and say, here's your lease, let's look at it. So one problem we see here in Seattle is lots of people who need better PSH go to clean and sober houses, but need a higher level of care. Are they going to the clean and sober housing because you can't get them into permanent supportive housing? Cherie, I think it's Cherie. You could go off mute and talk to me. It's on, yeah, there you go.
Sorry, what was the question for me?
Well, you were saying that a lot of people tend to go to the clean and sober housing.
Oh, I think that was Donna. That was right.
Oh, that was
above mine.
Donna. Oh, that
Yeah.
was Donna. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
So
I put that, I think I manage supportive housing. And I think my job is to create a safe space and allow somebody to go on their own journey. And if they want to set goals, I'm here to help them and give them that information on how to obtain those goals. Sometimes I'm just an office for them to take a breath at, but it's their journey. And so sometimes I have a hard time with to better themselves. Well, every day I don't want to better myself, right? I have the right to do that.
right.
So sometimes I'm in their face a little bit, but that's only when they've asked me to be in their face. Right. And so I think it's really to create that safe space for them to stay and live and create enrichment around them if they choose to go there.
Right. Right. And it's, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. We need to have a space for people to just be, and nobody wants to work on their life or work on things every day. But most of us have small goals, and our job as the staff are to try to hear those goals, even though when it comes time to writing the goals down, people might say, I have no goals. But they've been talking to you about things they want to accomplish. That's when you bring up, you say, well, you said you wanted to get a car. That's a goal. Should we put that down on your treatment plan? Because there are steps that we can definitely take to make that happen. instead of biting off the whole chunk, we can break that down into smaller goals.
One of the things that we did here is we developed a housing preference form for the participants to fill out on their own. So that way, going into it, prior to them coming to, like, I'm a peer counselor, so prior to them coming to us, then we know exactly what they're looking for as far as, you know, what they want. If they do want to go to a clean and sober house, then they have that option. And, you know, long term. So some of the clean and sober houses are a year long or, you know, permanent. And so it's literally their choice coming out of the gate as to what they want. It's just our job to assist them in finding the places, you know, that may be suitable to their needs.
Absolutely. And here's the other thing. Needs change, right? Just because, so say somebody comes into your program and they say, I want clean and sober living, and you go see a few places and they say, nah, I don't like that. I really want my own apartment. We should document that conversation. And then now we have a new goal, and that's finding a different type of an apartment. So we need to make sure that we allow clients or the participants to change their goals. We just need to change the documentation. And do not forget to change the documentation or to put in the goal that, okay, they did want clean and sober, but now they want this. Because what we need to see when we come in to do a Fidelity. Okay.
Sorry, I mucked it up. Ignore that.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. So we need to make sure that when our clients are changing their goals, that we are changing their goals on paper. Because I'll tell you what I've seen is the client says, I want a regular apartment. And that's what's in the file. But then I go to do a home visit and find out that the person is in a clean and sober place. What am I to take from that? I have no way of knowing that maybe the client changed their mind from a regular apartment to a clean and sober apartment. The only way I would know that is to look at the file, right? If you didn't put it in the file, then what it looks like is this person came in and said, I want a regular apartment. And you said, no, we're gonna put you in a clean and sober place. That's what it looks like. And that might not be the case, but if your documentation doesn't tell me, I don't know. I just will assume that you decided for whatever reason, this person would be better in a clean and sober place. So don't forget to document, people. That's where a lot of you shoot yourself in the foot. You don't document all the changes that a person will be telling you. You leave things the way they were and think, okay, no big deal. They only changed their mind about what type of housing they wanted to go into. But what that says to the reviewer is, we don't know if they changed their mind because you didn't document it. We don't know if you made this decision by yourself or if the tenant made the decision, right? Because you didn't document it. So if you, please remember, document. So I'm gonna not keep harping on this, but just, so the assessment. Everybody do an assessment with your people, with clients. Everybody's doing an assessment. Is it face-to-face? Hopefully it's face-to-face. Are you identifying their strengths? It's important to identify strengths of a person. Sometimes I ask what are their strengths, and I've been told many times I don't have any. And then I have to dig deeper. I start saying, well, what if I were to talk to some of your friends and ask them what are your strengths, what would they tell me? And some people will say, well, they say I'm a good listener, I'm resourceful, I can, if people need something, I can figure out a way to get it. Like, so those are strengths. Sometimes it's hard to talk about your strengths. We're taught that you shouldn't be bragging about what you can do. And some people have a really hard time talking about their strengths. So sometimes asking them, what do your friends say? What do people who know you say your strengths are? We want to focus on their strengths, because you know what? When things get tough, we're gonna have to depend on that strength to get them through the tough spots. And we're also gonna have to, say, well, you remember, you are good at doing this. You're good at finding resources. Now we need to find some resources. I'm gonna be looking, but I also need you to be looking. When we're doing that assessment, we should be educating people about housing options. What do all of these different programs mean? When you say clean and sober housing, what are you talking about? Because there are lots of different clean and sober housing, right? Not all of them are the same. Being very specific with what you mean when you say clean and sober. What do you mean when you say permanent supportive housing building? Is it really a building that is all permanent supportive housing, or are there a few clients in that building? We have to just really go through all of the choices with people, and we have to try to keep that information neutral. I don't care one way or the other where you decide to live. It's your choice. But we do need to talk about it, and we do need to figure out so we can start looking in the right places for your choice. I'm not just asking about your choices. I also want to know, like, what do you need when you move into the housing, or what are going to be some of your needs? What do you need from me? Do you need anything from me when you move into your housing, or are you good to go? Do you know how to clean? Do you know how to cook? Do you want to know how to cook? If you don't, that's fine too. Then we're going to probably end up talking about budgeting, because I'm going to assume you're on a fixed income, and eating out all the time is not easy. It's more expensive than cooking. So a goal might end up being, how to live within your budget to eat every day. Or we might have to come up with a whole different plan of maybe every week you're going to have to go to a food pantry or someplace like that to get a couple of meals, because we can't make your money stretch through the whole month. Those should be all included in that person's plan. Am I making sense, or are you hearing me? Informed choice. Somebody tell me, what is informed choice? Somebody come off mute, tell me what, because we talk about informed choice all the time, right? What does it mean?
I feel like it means giving all the information we possibly have so someone can make a choice, and not be blind to what's going on, or what the options are. And
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. And a lot of times I see staff holding on to that knowledge and not sharing it with the person. How is this person ever going to become independent if we don't start giving them information and letting them make choices? And that means letting them fail sometimes. I know staff are always worried. I don't want to set them up for failure. Who Who in this room has not failed at something? Did we learn from those failures? I hope we did. The clients are the same way. Some are gonna fail. Failure is not a problem. What happens when you fail? You get right back up. And one of the things I always do with clients is, what happened? Why didn't this work? Let's figure it out together so that we don't make the same mistake again. Does that make sense? But letting people fail is okay. If you spend all your time as a staff person trying not to let people fail, what do you think that's going to do for the services you provide? If your goal is to not let any of your clients ever fail, what do you think that means for your services? Any ideas, any
I
thoughts?
feel like they're gonna be biased and possibly, I don't know, it sounds exhausting to constantly be managing someone else's success or failure as well.
It is exhausting, yet we have staff who say that all the time. Have you not heard somebody say, I don't want to set them up for failure? I've heard it.
I feel like
lot.
I struggle with that because I'm a perfectionist
You are a
to myself, and
perfectionist,
so like that definitely bleeds into my work. So like, yeah.
but have you failed at anything?
Oh, all the time.
And you've learned from it, right?
Yes, but again, with myself, I have to fail sometimes a couple times and be like, oh yeah.
Exactly.
We
But we work so hard not to let our clients fail, when sometimes that's the way that they're gonna learn. I've seen staff bend over backwards to do everything for the client, even stuff that the client could have normally done on his own or her own. But the staff is so busy trying to make sure everything is just right and that this person is going to be successful no matter what. It's tiring and it's not realistic. I don't want my daughter to fail, but at the same time, she's going to have to fail at some stuff. Can you imagine in a world that nobody's ever failed at anything? That means people aren't really trying new stuff, right? You don't fail if you just keep doing the same thing over and over again. But if you try to push yourself out of your comfort zone, it's a good chance you might fail. But you do then that gives you a sense of what's realistic for you and what's not realistic. So basically, informed choice is just what was said by someone else earlier. We give them the information and we let them use that information to inform their choice. So that means if we know stuff about the housing, we need to be telling them that up front so they can use that in making their decision. So if we know, at this one place that they don't allow smoking, and you have a smoker, and you're not having a conversation about, okay, you want to move into this building and you smoke and you know they don't want smokers in the building, what are you going to do? Are you going to want to go outside and smoke every time you need a cigarette? Or are you going to try to sneak and smoke in your unit? Let's try to figure out, are you wanting this unit because you like it? If that's the case, let's try to find a place that's very similar that you like as well, that you can smoke. Because realistically, it's hard for people who smoke to always leave their apartment to smoke, especially when it's cold or it's raining. Who wants to go outside to smoke a cigarette in the rain when you got a perfectly good apartment? So just really helping people to think through those decisions is what our job is. It's not to say, don't take that place because you love to smoke and they won't let you smoke. It's to say, look, this place that you chose will not allow you to smoke in your apartment. How are you going to deal with that since you told me you smoked a pack a day? Why do we do a fidelity review? Why do you think a fidelity review is important? Does anybody in here know if they're doing a good job? Everybody in here, anybody for sure know I'm doing the best job ever? Or are there times that you're like, I don't know, I'm not sure about these couple. I know over here I'm doing a good job with some of people, but not with everybody.
I think
I try to do it the best I can. I try to document everything as if someone else will read it and they know what's going on with the individual I'm helping. Let's say I quit my job. People are going to be able to read my progress notes and know what steps are next or what was done in the last session, But
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thomas, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say for me, this has been super informative for me, just because I know I've been the person that has really tried to save them from failing. I'll just say, being having a savior complex with this and not really knowing, but it's created a seeing my own. It made me really see my own biases in trying to help. It's really not helping. It's actually, taking away their choice. And so this has been like super informative for me. So thank you.
Thank you. And the reason we do fidelity reviews, guess what? If nobody ever came and looked at your files, nobody ever checked on you, we will take shortcuts. I know doing documentation has never been fun for me. I can't imagine that it's fun for anybody. But it needs to be done, right? Like somebody said, it's, they do it because if they leave their job, somebody else comes in, they need to know where they were to continue to work. If we didn't look at programs objectively by coming in and looking at files and reviewing documentation, I think a lot of programs would start taking shortcuts or not writing down everything in the file. If you know somebody's going to be looking at it, then you're more likely to do it, right? It's just kind of, if you don't measure anything, there's no guarantee that it's going to get done. There is no guarantee that all of you are going to be doing this the way it should be done, because you'll start coming up with your own way to do it or what makes sense more for you than following this program. You'll be like, well, over here I did that and that worked out pretty good, so I'm gonna just change this. That whole informed choice thing, it's not all it's cracked up to be. I'm not gonna do it that way. We have a tendency to look for shortcuts. I know I did when I first got into this and I was doing paperwork, and I did this before we had caps on the number of clients you can have. My first job as a housing specialist, I had on my caseload 35 people. 35. Which meant a lot of documentation, And we had standards. I had to write in everybody's file at least once a month, more than that for most files. If I had my druthers, I would have only documented in the files one time a month. But because I know other people were going to be coming to audit my files, I made sure I got everything in there. And I did it in a timely fashion because there was a check and balance. We sometimes need checks and balances to make sure we're doing things the proper way. So the reason we do fidelity reviews, sometimes it takes an objective person. Many times you can go through this job doing permanent supportive housing and think that you're doing a great job and not sure what part, but maybe you're doing a great job. Let me just say this. Okay, so Cherie, say you're doing a great job. You're the only one though at your agency doing a good job. And we want everybody to be doing it the way Cherie does it, because Cherie is doing some great, amazing things with people. How do we figure out what Cherie is doing so that we can have everybody else doing it and having the same success? We need to figure out what is Cherie doing that is making things great for people. And sometimes that's not always obvious. Cherie might be doing some things that she's not documenting. Maybe she's going to people's houses with a cup of coffee and has established a good relationship with the person. They trust her. Maybe that's her secret. But we don't know until we can look at what Cherie is doing and saying, oh, this is what she's doing that nobody else is doing, and this is why she's having success. So when we do fidelities, it's like having an extra pair of eyes looking at the work you're doing and saying, oh, well, okay, you're doing good because you're doing all these things, but you could be doing better if you did these other things. But it's hard to know that when you're in the middle of it. It's like writing a paper. You ever try to edit your own work? It's hard to edit your own work, right? Because you know what you meant to say and your brain starts to, when you read it, you're not necessarily reading what you wrote, but you're reading it with knowing what you were trying to say. So it might not be clear to anybody but you because you were the only pair of eyes that looked at it. Fidelity assessments give us a sense of what parts are we doing really well and what parts need improvement. And you have to look at this as a continual, a chance for continual improvement is by having a fidelity review. Somebody's going to be coming in, looking at everything you do, saying, okay, Colette, you're doing all of these things over here, perfect. But here are some of the areas that need some work. And if you improve in these areas, you're going to be even more successful. That would be nice, right? Somebody coming in telling you, here are the things you're doing well, here's where you can improve. That's what a fidelity review is all about. So I was gonna ask you to go over the dimensions and tell me what dimensions are important. Oh, somebody says, what are the caps on how many clients you can have? Anybody wanna answer that question? How many clients should you have in permanent supportive housing? Anybody know? How about some of my people who've been doing this for a while? You know?
We have 18 as a housing professional, 12 as a manager, and 8 as an administrator.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else know how many people you can have on your caseload?
I thought it says 20, but I'm also a program manager. I don't think we're really supposed to have a caseload. I don't know.
Well, we're gonna get to it. I'm gonna just keep you on the edge of your seat. I'm not gonna tell you yet. We're gonna get to it. So let's talk about the 7 dimensions. We're also gonna get to a point that I'm gonna teach you when you're doing a Fidelity report, what is being looked at. So here are the 7 dimensions of permanent supportive housing: choice of housing, separation of housing and services, decent, safe, and affordable housing, housing integration, rights of tenancy, access to housing, flexible voluntary services. Anybody out there know when we say choice of housing, what we're talking about?
I think that's their choice, what they want to move into, and it doesn't depend, or there's no contingency. Like maybe they're using still, but they still have the right to housing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So basically, choice of housing looks at several things. The types of housing. Are we giving people choices in the types of housing that they can move into? Are we also giving them choice in who lives with them? Anybody in here ever have moved somebody into a place and have them move in friends or family or kids or friends from the streets? Anybody?
I haven't had that experience with a client, but I was a property manager for HUD and tax credit. And so we would have people that, came in homeless and they didn't understand that their friends weren't allowed to stay for months on end. And that did, raise problems.
Uh-huh. I've had couples approach and want to be housed together. And at the housing that I was working at the time, we had to say no. What we ended up doing was having them both live in the building, and we put them in units that shared a bathroom so they could actually live together. We had to make that work. So they basically ended up having a 2-studio apartment with the bathroom. And they turned one room into a little, seating area for the TV, and the other room was a bedroom. But what this means is, if we listen to people up front and say, who do you want to live with? If they choose somebody, that we have to help them with that choice. So say, for instance, you came and you said, Heidi, where do you want to live? And she says, I want to live in Seattle, in this part of town. Then I say, who do you want to live with? And Heidi says, I want to live with my boyfriend. He and I get along. We can make it work that way. We can put together our incomes to make it work. That's what we want. And a lot of our programs would say no, right? Nope, you can't live with somebody. But we know what will happen is that Heidi will move into that apartment anyway because she feels like she doesn't have many choices. And then she's gonna sneak in her boyfriend. And he won't be on the lease. And then she can get evicted because she has somebody living there who is not on the lease. We have to ask people up front, who do they want to live with? And we have to try to give them that option of living with that person. Because what we found out is that people will move in their friends anyway, whether we say yes or no anyway. They're going to do it. So why not give them that option up front? Now, what does that mean? So let's go back to informed choice. So Rayanne wants to live with her boyfriend. And here's what I would say to Rayanne. Okay, that's fine. And remember all the choices that we just went through about a regular apartment, we have this subsidized apartment, we have clean and sober living. If you want to live with your boyfriend, we're gonna have to, you're not gonna be able to live in this affordable apartment because it's only a small studio meant for one person. So that's gonna be off the table because they're not gonna let two people live in that small studio apartment because it's not even a studio, it's an efficiency. They're not gonna let two people live in there. So we're gonna have to make some changes to your options because you wanna live with your boyfriend. But you still get to live with your boyfriend, but we're gonna have to find a place that both of you can live in. Right? It doesn't mean we don't work with that person. It just means we gotta look at some different options. But if we don't let her move her boyfriend in, chances are good that she moves him in and gets into trouble. So let's deal with it up front. But it's also gonna mean less choices, right? Like Rayanne can't move into a clean and sober house and be living with her boyfriend because a lot of them are group living situations. Okay, maybe both of them can move in there, but they're not gonna be sharing a bed. We have to be informing them of how this decision is going to affect all of their choices. That's all we are doing is giving the information. We're not saying, Rayanne, don't move in with your boyfriend. We're saying, okay, well, here we have to redefine the choices because some of the choices that you had expressed interest in, both of you will not be able to live there. Or if you're going into if you go into an SRO, SROs are not meant for two people. SROs are meant for one person. So the SRO is going to be off the table if the two of you want to live in the same apartment and share a bed. But a regular apartment's on the list, and we might even be able to find say for instance, we might be able to find, a 1-bedroom where you can live, or even a studio where you can live and put your money together to afford it. That's fine. But we just need to make sure we're explaining the options to that person and the couple. But if you don't give them that choice, then you might be looking for another place soon after you found that first one, because when they move in their boyfriend and lose that apartment, we're still gonna have to find another place. And now hopefully we find one that they can have their boyfriend with them. Am I making sense? Because sometimes to me, it seems like if we give these choices up front, and I know it doesn't make life easier for us as staff to do that, because it's hard. It's hard to give out all the choices. It would make our job a lot easier if we could just pick a place that we think that would be the best fit for them and move them in and move in whoever we thought was good for them, but it don't work that way. What is separation of housing and services? Anybody know what that dimension is all about? Nobody?
I know we have separation of housing and services because I'm a program manager and then we have a property manager.
Uh-huh.
So I work with the programming and supporting the residents on how to maintain their housing. But then we have the property manager who enforces the lease, who
Mhm,
does all the legal stuff. We
mhm,
try not to make it good guy, bad guy, where it's a team that the managers got together.
mhm,
But this is reality of how what's in your lease.
mhm.
And then my team comes in and says, how can I support you to make sure you can live within those bounds?
Mhm. So why would you want to have that separate?
Because relationship is so important. And so to me, with the program, I don't want to say be trusted differently in the sense of I can work with them. I can push back on the property manager. I can teach them their advocacy. My property manager hates when I do this, but
Mhm,
like when they say no to that ADA accommodation, I can pull out and say, well, you know what? They should have said yes. Instead of
mhm,
you getting mad and doing this, let's look at
mhm,
our legal rights on how we get that accommodation and what we need. So
mhm.
I'm here to teach them how to utilize their own advocacy and their own voice to get what they need from the landlord also.
Mhm.
So
Ab- ab-
I think those are some
Absolutely,
of the things that make.
absolutely. I'm gonna give you an example of why it's important that those two functions be separate. I was the service person and I went to meet with my client who said, "Oh, I don't need to talk to you. I already had a conversation with the manager." And the manager said it was okay for me to not take out my garbage every day. So even though you told me to take it out every day, the manager said, I don't have to do that. Okay. Then the garbage piled up. And the manager was like, no, you can't have all this garbage in your room. And the tenant says, well, you said I didn't have to take it out every day. The property manager is like, yeah, but you still have to take it out. The tenant got upset because they felt like the manager was telling them two different things. You told me I didn't have to take it out every day, and now you're telling me I have to take it out. Make up your mind. One of the things we don't want is we don't want property managers who are trained to be property managers trying to be service staff. It's a very different skill set. I know all of my property managers that I've had over the years always thought that they were a good listener and they could do my job because all I do is sit there and listen to people, and they're a good listener, so they can do that. And so I've had many a manager try to be the service person. And then the person will not talk to me, the service person, because they're talking to the property manager. It works to a point, but then I've had those property managers have to go back and try to reinforce the lease. And the person gets really pissed because, wait, I thought we were friends. I'm friendly with the property manager. You're not gonna hold me to the same standards you hold everybody else to. And the property manager had to hold them to the same standards, and then they got off on a bad foot with the property manager. And now they're looking at me to come in and resolve the issue that they're having with the property manager, which is not a good use of anybody's time. We really need to keep keep the separation. Service people should not be collecting rent. Service people should not be reinforcing or enforcing the lease. It is not our job to go in and tell the person, we're gonna have to kick you out because your place is a pigsty and blah, blah, blah. That is not, our job is to go in and help them get that apartment together to stay in it. property management's job is to enforce the lease. It gets very confusing for people when we're going off into different roles. They start to not trust the service staff as much because service staff is enforcing the lease. And property managers just be a good ear, or, you know, sitting there listening to me. I'm gonna want to talk to the property manager, not the service person. By each of us doing our jobs and staying in our lanes, it makes it fairly clear for the client on who they should go to for what. If they can't pay the rent, they should be talking to the landlord. Yes, they can talk to the service person, but all the service person is gonna say is, you want me to be there when you talk to the property manager? But we need to try to figure out a way for you to get caught up on your rent. But the service person has no power to give a payment plan or to resolve that issue. That's a property management issue. We don't want the property manager sitting there listening to people, because I've had that happen. I had one property manager tell a client, we're friends, right? I like you, you like me. I don't want you to mess, you know, next time don't mess with this other neighbor, because, you know, the neighbor gets upset and then I gotta get involved, and we're friends though. So, you know, it's just for me, don't mess with that person. Then the tenant messed with another neighbor. And so now the landlord is having to enforce the lease by saying, no, you can't do that. And the tenant came back at her and said, I thought we were friends. And friends don't treat friends like that. And so the property manager, all of the respect and authority she had went out the window, because now he's like, that's not how friends act. We're friends. You can't kick me out because we're friends. You should give me an extra month to pay my rent because we're friends. We need to keep those roles separate. I know, and this only becomes a problem when agencies own housing, and sometimes they haven't staffed the building correctly. Or sometimes they only have one property manager, and when that property manager either goes on vacation or gets sick, then the service staff have to jump in and pick up the slack. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for the clients. It gets to be confusing. And most clients will not want to talk to services if services is enforcing the lease. That trust that we work so hard to get will go out the window when we start trying to enforce a lease. Keep them separate. Let me check the chat box. I see people. So somebody is writing about Sage. Hold on. We do have departments or projects that help them get housed and then help them get settled and get them, hold on, my computer is acting strange, who help them get settled and get them other services such as DESC. Sage, who support them alongside the housing counselors on the property. But I'm assuming Sage is not the property managers. Because, you know, again, it's fine to have multiple people working with a client. I've had clients who I was the housing specialist, they had an employment specialist, they had a case manager, they had a therapist, and they had a psychiatrist. That's fine. My lane is housing. I need to help this person get into housing and maintain that housing. But I may need to talk to other people who are working with that client because some of the other issues might influence how they're maintaining their housing. If they start using drugs and alcohol, that could affect their housing. So I need to talk to somebody. If they're working with somebody on their substance use issue, I need to be talking to that person saying, okay, their housing is in jeopardy because they've started using and they're having issues in their apartment. What are we gonna do? And we work together as a team, but I am not gonna go work with the property manager on a plan for the team, for that person. Safe, decent, and affordable is also a dimension. That one kind of goes, it's kind of an easy one, but yet a hard one. Safe, decent, and affordable means that the place is safe to live in, right? So every apartment should have an inspection. That inspection can be done by HUD, but if you're finding a regular apartment and it doesn't have a subsidy, you can do an inspection. There are forms that are fairly easy for you to follow to do an inspection. They're not complicated, but every place that somebody is housed should have an inspection. Now, there are some places that you are not going to do an inspection. Say somebody moves into and becomes a roommate of people who are not in the program. We're not going to go into somebody else's apartment to do a unit inspection when this person is only going to be living in this part of the apartment. I've also had people becoming rooming. They get a room in a house with the owner, and all they have is that room. I cannot go into somebody's house to do an inspection because they're not in our program. This person's only renting that room. They're not renting the entire house. So there are times when you might not be able to do an inspection, but most times you should have an inspection of the place. You need to keep a copy of the inspection. The only times you don't need to have a copy of the inspection is if it's a subsidized unit. If it's subsidized, most subsidy programs have inspections, have annual inspections. We will assume that it's had an inspection if it has a subsidy, especially a HUD subsidy. They come out and inspect units once a year at least. So if it's subsidized, we will assume there's an inspection. If it's not subsidized, you need to do a walkthrough of the apartment and do an inspection. Where would we find the inspection document? See, Rayanne's already answered that. We will include those. There is a location where there are lots of documentation. There's so much documentation because you're not the first ones to do this. We've asked other agencies for their best practices and their best documentation. Rayanne or Kimberly are going to help you get access to all of that documentation out there. There is a lot of documentation that's been put on the internet, and it's got a file and you can go in and get that documentation. I'll make sure that they let you know how to do that. This is not about reinventing the wheel, people. You can use what other people have done and do just as well. Housing integration means that we again need to put people into integrated situations. Does somebody have a question? Okay, I thought I heard somebody. That means that we want people living in buildings that 25% or fewer of the units have been set aside for persons with disabilities, special needs, and we don't want to put everybody in the same building, because that building becomes the building where the people with mental health issues live. And it develops a reputation that is not good. And it might not even warrant that, but if everybody sees people living there with mental health issues, that's going to be the reputation of that building. We want to avoid that. Sometimes I've seen agencies who are going out finding apartments and finding landlords. They find a couple of landlords that work with them, and they put everybody in those 2 landlord buildings. And they all of a sudden are not integrated anymore because they've packed up the buildings with their clients. You just need to be careful. You need to make sure you have as many landlords to work with as you can, and not try to find 2 landlords and then put all your people in those 2 landlord buildings, because you're basically taking away the integration piece. All right, rights of tenancy, easy. Everybody needs a lease. And we want the lease to be a regular lease that anybody can have in that rents an apartment, a standard lease. Now, granted, if they move into a program, a clean and sober program, they're not going to be regular leases. They're going to be special leases. That is okay as long as the tenant chose to move into that building and chose that whole, I want to go into clean and sober living, and that's where I want to be housed. Am I making sense so far, or am I losing people?
No, you're making sense. I do have a question though.
Yeah.
We have single room occupancies here. So one of the things that any of our units within our organization that are all single room occupancy space, they don't allow overnight visitors because there's shared bathroom and shared kitchens, and just the space use is different, and it's not fair to other residents there to have somebody they don't know use the bathroom.
Right.
So is that kind of within this model because of the uniqueness of the building?
All housing is in this, as long as people are choosing that, as long as we're giving them full range of choices, and that's what they're choosing. I'm gonna tell you a secret. Some of you might have heard this from me before, but I'm gonna tell you now because I need to manage your expectations. Nobody ever gets a perfect score on Fidelity. You know why? People have choices. People are going to choose to live maybe in a place that can't pass an inspection. I've had one person who chose to live in a place that would not pass an inspection, but that's where he wanted to live. And I made him aware that this place would not pass an inspection. But I did not try to convince him not to move there. He didn't tell me at first why he wanted to live there. It was just the place he chose. I found out about 9 months later, he chose that place because a bunch of the street people he used to live with moved into that building, and he wanted to be near them. They had all promised each other if they ever got into housing, they were going to support each other to get on their feet. And so he didn't tell me, but it was not a big deal. I'm like, fine, if you really want to live here, fine. It was not a place I would have chosen. but that wasn't my decision. That wasn't up to me. Access to housing goes a step further than all of you. Access to housing says that anybody who comes to us and says, I want housing, should be in the housing program, if you have room. Here's where you get into trouble. How many of you get referrals to your housing program? A lot of you get referrals. Are the people who refer people to you, are they trained in permanent supportive housing and know that anybody who comes to them and says, I want housing, should be referred to the PSH program? Because most times people think, oh, well, my agency, we're not creating any hurdles for people. Anybody who comes to us can get housing. But many times the places who are referring to you are not sending you everybody. That affects your score. It is your responsibility to make sure that your partners understand that this is housing for anybody. We're trying to serve the hardest to serve people in this program. So anybody who comes to any of the clinicians, any of the therapists, and say, I want housing, should be referred to your program. If your referrals, your place that does referrals are not sending you everybody, your score is going to be affected. Because what is happening is the referral agency is making choices about who will be successful in the housing. And many times they're basing it on whether or not somebody's taking their medication, or whether somebody's clean and sober, or who knows. But basically, if you have referrals, you need to educate your referring agencies on everybody needs to be referred to us. Do not decide who should come to us for housing and who shouldn't come to us for housing. I see a question. You want to come off mute, or let me see if I can read the question and understand the question. Man, I'm going through a lot of them to get to that question. Hold on.
This is Carrie. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so my question is just relevant to the FCS referral that can come from any clinician. Of course, we do want to make more people eligible than ineligible. However difficult the funding may be when they are eligible, for whatever categories they go into. I'm looking for the FCS.
No, so I know what you're talking about. So
okay, the risk factor.
Right. So if they're coming through the FCS program, if they're being referred to you through the FCS, that's a matter of funding. That's not a matter of somebody's making a choice about whether or not they can get into the program. That's somebody making a choice about whether or not they're eligible for the funding. And if they're not eligible for the funding, they can't come into the program. That's different. So don't look at that differently. But if you're working with another agency that is making referrals to your program, and if they're making referrals to the FCS program and not everybody's getting referred to the FCS program, then that's a problem.
Well, I am FCS.
Okay.
And I work for a mental and behavioral health agency.
Right.
And so oftentimes the referral doesn't qualify. However, can I ask, are there folks here and clinicians here from housing authorities and other individuals that are not FCS, just so that I'm able to connect that info?
I think most people here are FCS.
Okay.
And I get what you're saying. So let me try to clarify what I'm saying. If it's a matter of funding, then FCS can decide who gets into the program based on the funding. If people are not eligible for the funding, then yes, they should not be in the program. But it should be only because of their funding, not because a clinician is saying they're not ready because they're not taking their meds. So every funding stream has their criteria, right? As long as you're looking at that criteria and applying it across the board, that's fine. What we don't want is some agencies are just doing housing and they're getting their referrals from a mental health facility or a substance use facility, and clinicians are deciding who gets into the housing programs. We don't want those clinicians deciding on who gets in. Does that make sense? Thanks, Carrie. I see it helps, that distinction helps. If it's a funding requirement, that's different than if it's a staff putting an arbitrary thing in there. So as long as they meet the criteria of the funding, they should be sent to your program. If you have clinicians who are making a referral and deciding not to make the referral because they feel like this person's not taking their meds, then that's a problem. But as long as the referrals are based on whether or not they meet the criteria of the funding, that's fine. But you don't want people making decisions about others. Because I know when I first got into the field of permanent supportive housing, we only took people who were taking their meds and were clean and sober. That was what we were supposed to be taking. Guess what? Not all the people were taking their meds, and not all of them were clean and sober, because it was by their word only, by the client's word. That didn't really matter. What mattered is that they got into the program and we could work with them. So Donna, what are you saying about, oh, you don't have volume. So you're saying something about you're not getting, that everybody is not getting into the program for HARPs. Is that what you're saying? Because HARPs, I mean, yes, people can refer people to the program, but they should be referring anybody who says, I want housing. So this is the one thing that you need to make sure of, is whoever's referring to your program, that they understand the criteria of your program and that they're not making choices, or that they're not adding criteria to your criteria. You see what I'm saying? Where some places, I know that folks do not have to demonstrate a readiness for housing. This translates loosely to meds and substance. Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. So we don't want anybody deciding who is ready for housing, because we have yet to figure out what that looks like. We don't know who's ready for housing. And I would tell you, there have been many people that I didn't think were ready for housing that did great. And there were some people I thought were perfect and they flunked out. We do not get to make that choice. It's up to the person. And the one thing we know is that when clients are ready for housing, they're going to do better. And we have to get them when they're ready, not, you know, sometimes we are not fast enough to get to people.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So at our facility, after you've lived here for a year, You're eligible for a tenant-based voucher because right now they have project-based vouchers, right?
Right.
And so once again, the VASH team says that they have to meet certain criteria to get that tenant-based voucher. I've heard the
Okay.
VASH case manager multiple times say, oh, they're not ready for tenant-based voucher. I always try to push back, but I don't know where I only push so far when I'm not on steady ground of my own convictions and my own, not convictions, but like the evidence-based part.
I get it.
And
So
so how far should I push on that? Like everybody's ready for housing. It doesn't matter that they haven't passed their King County inspections.
So who's saying that they're not ready for housing? Is this the government, like the place that issues the subsidies? Is it government?
Well, it's the VASH program. So the VASH
it's-
program has a contract with King County Housing Authority for a certain amount of VASH vouchers. Some of them are tenant, some of them are project-based vouchers. So when they come here, they have a VASH project-based voucher.
Right.
However, it says after they've lived here a year and done their lease, they can move out and they get a tenant-based voucher. So what I see as the barrier is that case manager is making the choice
Right.
if they're ready to get that tenant-based voucher.
Right. And so what I would recommend is not talking to that person making the referral, but you might need to have a meeting with the person who supervises that team and say, this is what we're trying to do. And if you're telling people they have to maintain their housing for a year and then they're eligible for this, then we shouldn't be adding in if we think they can or can't be ready for housing. So it's going to require some education. It might require somebody talking to the manager of all of those people, explaining that if people have made it a year, they shouldn't have to, go through another year in this housing to prove themselves ready for housing.
Okay, I just wanted to see how far I could push it, like if my ideas were correct.
No, your ideas are correct, and they should not be making that decision based on whether or not they're taking their meds, based on their mental health diagnosis, based on substance use. It should really be based on that person wants housing.
That's what I thought.
And if you're going to be providing the services to help them maintain that housing, that's all that's needed to be successful.
That's what I thought. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Because
No
now I
problem.
will go with more confidence to the higher
Yes.
levels to
Yes.
push back. Because I
Yes.
have people here that feel like they're stuck here. And I
Yeah,
don't want
that-
anybody what a horrible feeling, right? I wouldn't
Yeah,
want
it
to
is
feel
a
stuck
horrible
anywhere.
feeling. And what makes anybody else think that they know what's going to make that person successful? They don't. So, all right, so we have to provide flexible voluntary services. I think this one is pretty standard. It's not rocket science. Basically, people can refuse treatment in most of the programs except for HUD VASH, where they have to get the staff working with them. But people can say, no, I don't want to meet with you every week. Maybe I only want to meet with you once a month. That's fine. As long as there's no problems, we can meet once a month. But I always let people know, look, if things change and you want to meet more often, let me know. We can ramp it up or we can ramp it down, whichever works for you. We also need to give them a chance to say where they want to meet and how long do they want to meet. Sometimes, yes, we can say, if somebody says, I really don't want to come to the office, I really don't want you to come to my home, can we just meet on the phone? We can do that, but at some point you need to see the apartment to make sure that things are not going south and that this person's gonna be digging themselves a hole. But we don't always have to meet at the home. We can meet at McDonald's. We can meet at my office. We can meet anywhere, but not on a regular basis. At some point, I need to get into the apartment to see how the apartment is doing, to see how this person is doing in their apartment. But yes, we can mix it up. I've seen some people 2 times a week, and I've seen some people once a month. I've seen some people every day for the first month because they were struggling. That's okay. We need to be able to adjust our services to meet the needs of the person. That's why we have a small caseload. That's why we work with people, because, and we also need to make sure we're giving them an opportunity to say what time they want to meet with us. I've learned the hard way. You don't just pop into somebody's house because you're in the neighborhood, or you were over there to visit another client, so you figured you might as well kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You got to go visit your other client over there. Unless they know you're coming, I would keep my expectations low, and they might not even come to the door because they're not expecting you. A lot of times it helps if you say to the person, what's a good time to meet? And where do you want to meet? Give them the choice. All right, I think let's take a 10-minute break. So it's almost the top of the hour. I have 2 minutes until the top of the hour. So let's come back and meet at 10 after the hour. That's 12 minutes for you to go take care of your needs. Are we all back?
I'm back.
Okay. All right. I'm assuming that people could hear me because I was outside of my office talking, but we're all good. All right. So let's talk about what this fidelity looks like, or what does it mean? Anybody on here ever been in a fidelity review or had a fidelity review done to their program? Okay, so somebody has had a fidelity review. So in the fidelity review, you only get a range of scores. You can get a range of scores from 1 to 4. 1 means that you're not doing it. It means you're doing it, but you're not doing the way it was supposed to be done. A 4 means you're doing it perfectly. Sometimes the only score you can get is a 1 or a 4. Either you're doing it or you're not doing it. Sometimes you can get a score of a 1 or a 2.5 or a 4. A 1 means you're not doing it. A 2.5 means you're doing parts of it. And a 4 means you're doing all of it. So as you can see down here, 1 equals not implemented. 4 means fully implemented. Everybody got that? All right, I'm gonna take that as yes, you got it. So the way we do scoring in Washington State is that it's usually done by a team of people. And they do consensus scoring. What does consensus scoring mean? It means that the whole team will look at different parts and will, oh, somebody's having problems with their connection and had to log back in. That's fine. As long as you're here, we're happy. So the highest possible score you can get is 28. I have never seen a 28. I would be suspicious if I saw a 28. The reason you cannot get a perfect score is because we are dealing with humans, people. People will decide what they want to do. People will decide that they want to live in a place that is not, that cannot meet HQS. Some people might decide they want to live in a place that they don't have a lease. Some people may decide, or some programs, I've had a program decide that they weren't going to move people into a certain part of town because as the staff people, they didn't feel safe to go to that part of town. So they were going to limit choice and take a hit on the score. And they were fine with that because they were like, safety is more important than a perfect score. But nobody ever gets a perfect score. And once you start looking at it, you will see why it's not possible. If you like math, like some of us geeky people, I love math, there is no way that you can get a perfect score. So let's take a look. What are we talking about? So dimension 1. Remember dimension 1, choice of housing? So the first one is, do tenants have a choice of type of housing? This means, are you giving people the full range of choices, not a small range? Because see, here's the thing. If I give you a full range of pop or sodas, I'm gonna make sure you have every soda available, because that's full range, right? But if I say to you, you only have a choice between Pepsi and Coke, I'm giving you choice, right? But I'm not giving you full choice. I'm giving you a limited choice. I might have decided that those are the only two sodas that I can find, and the others are too hard to find. So I'm not going to give you all of those others. You decide between the two I found, Pepsi or Coke. In that case, if they have limited choice, that's going to be a 2.5. If they have full choice, that's going to be a 4. If they don't, if you're not giving the participants any choice, you're just putting them in the place that you have, that's a 1. So even if they get housed, if you didn't give choice on this dimension, it still will be a 1. If you gave limited choices, a 2.5. If you give full choice, you put out all of the sodas and you say, okay, well, here's this root beer over here, but this root beer is really hard to find, but it's an option, but it's just hard to find because there are not that many of them. And that could be affordable housing for it, you know, the way I'm describing it, that could be affordable. An affordable option might not be easy to find. But if, you know, I could also say, but the wait list is open, we can put your name on the wait list, but other than that, there's not much we can do. If you really want to move into that subsidized housing, we put your name on the list, and maybe what we can do is find you another place to move into until that subsidized unit becomes available. But we have to give tenants full choice, not just partial choice, not choose between Pepsi and Coke, but here's orange soda, here's cream soda, here's root beer, here's, you know, Sprite, 7-Up, ginger ale. We put all of the choices on the table. Another thing we also look at is, can tenants wait without losing their place in line? And what do we mean by that? Say you have a person that's next on the list of, you know, just came to your caseload, and it's Pat Tucker. You're gonna have to house Pat Tucker. And every place we go to look at, I'm like, I don't like it. I don't like it. That's not the place for me. I don't like it. Do I get punished because I'm saying I don't like that place? Or am I given time to figure out where I want to live? What we would like to see is me being given time of where I want to live. And so the way you do that is say, okay, Pat, we've looked at 6 places. You've said no to all 6. Let's think about where you want to move, where you really want to move to, and try to narrow it down so we can focus in that space or in that area. But do that, and we'll once you have that, we'll go right back into looking at more places. That's important. We want people to not feel like if they say no, they go to the bottom of your line and they have to wait again until their name comes up for them to see more places. Yes, Thomas.
So with our program, we have limited funding for, because I actually am the HARPS peer here. And so we can switch them over to SEBRA, but because SEBRA's closed at this point right now in our county, we only have limited funding for that. And
Right.
so does that drop our score because we have limitations as a company to be able to house them?
Well, technically it shouldn't, but here's what you would have to do. You need to, if they want to go into this other program and that program is closed, we need to make sure they have that information. We need to also try to look to see if we can find another option that would work for them. If they keep saying no to those options, our job is to try to keep looking for that option while they wait. Where you might get into trouble is if you have very limited choice because you don't have the funding, the score may get dropped to a 2.5 where people have limited choice. That's not going to kill your program. Actually, if that's the only place you lose points at is on this, you're still in Fidelity. You're still doing well. You have a high fidelity program if you only lose that 1.5 points. Sometimes if you're the manager of a program like this, you might decide, say if I was a manager and we had our own housing, that means if we have our own building, I can't give people real choice, right? Because it's one building. They can, if I have 2 apartments available, they can choose between those 2 apartments. But that's not real choice, is it? It's limited choice, and it's very limited choice because it's in the same building and you only get to choose between 2 apartments. I would still get a 2.5 on this because I gave limited choice, which might be as good as I can do at that moment based on the funding and based on the market. Not that big of a deal in the scheme of things. I mean, it's not losing a 1.5 is not gonna hurt your program. It's not gonna affect the funding of your program. When you start losing points in every dimension, that's when you have a problem. So there are some dimensions you should be able to get a 4 easily. Like on the one that people have to have a lease, that should be a 4 across the board. Everybody, whether it's a lease or a living arrangement or a living agreement, you should have copies of all of that in your files, because that's how you're going to get a 4 on that. So losing points is not that big of a deal, so I wouldn't worry so much about it, Thomas. I think it's just a matter of what the reality is, and whoever's there need to be explaining when you have a fidelity review, this is our reality. And we're doing the best we can within our reality. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
The other thing that you're also being, that is being taken into account is, do they get to decide who they live with? If the tenants get to decide who they live with, across the board, like there's no restrictions, they get to make that choice, it's a 4. If some of the people get to make that decision and some don't, it's a 2.5. If nobody gets to make that decision, everybody's going to go into an SRO and have to live on their own, that's a 1. For these scores, the fun part for Fidelity is that every person has to get a score. Can you picture that? So say you have, in your housing program, you have 20 people. That means I have to get 20 scores for each of these categories. So for whether or not tenants have a choice of type of housing, I'm going to be looking at all of those 20 people and looking at, did they have a choice? And each one of those tenants will get a score of a 1 or a 2.5 or a 4. So I got 20 scores, right? I take those scores and I add them up together. So say some people get a 4, some people get a 2.5, some people get a 1. I'm gonna get a weird number, probably, because I have to do that for every person. And then what I do is I add those scores all up together, and then I divide that by 20 because it was 20 people. That's gonna give me the score for that category. Don't be alarmed if you see a score like a 3.2567, something like that, because it basically is averaging out all of your people for that dimension. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, let me know, but that's how we score for that, for choice. Then you got real choice. The scoring is a 1 or a 4. Do people get multiple units to choose from? That's either a yes or a no. If they only got to look at one place and they were only given that one place to look at, that's a 1. If they were giving real choice, then that's a 4. So again, I would do this for every person and then take all of those scores, add them up together, and divide by the number of scores I put into that category. So again, it could be a strange number. It could be something like a 2.785321, something like that. Because I can't just group all the tenants together and say everybody gets a 4, because that may not be the case. And it also accounts for, say there are 3 housing specialists at one agency. I gotta look at everybody's caseload and do all of those people and give them all a score and then add them all together and divide by that total number of people that are in the housing program. So if you have 60 people between 3 case managers or 3 housing specialists, that's gonna be 60 scores divided by 60, and that's gonna give me the score for this category. Same thing with choice of living arrangements. And then what we do after we get, so I get a score for choice of housing or choice of type of housing. I get a score for can you wait without losing your place. I get a score for if tenants get to decide who they live with. I take all 3 of those scores and I add them together and divide it by 3, and that gives me your score for dimension 1. I need somebody to tell me either that made sense or that did not make sense. Sometimes when you've been doing this for a long time, you don't think about some of the math you have to do, but this one becomes about math. It makes sense. Okay, good. I'm glad it makes sense. So that's how you would score dimension 1. And it's for every person. So you need the entire caseload for all of the housing specialists. And you need to be able to go through all of those and see where people are living and looking at the files to see if they had choice and then giving a score. So that's dimension 1. Easy, right? It can get to, it's not difficult work. It's just sometimes some people are intimidated by the math. Yes, this is where using your housing log would be really important. if you don't have a way to keep your housing units, Kimberly is going to give you access to, I think it's Pathways, where there's an Excel spreadsheet that will do all of the work for you. All you have to do is put in either the initials of the person and put in where they're housed, and it's an Excel spreadsheet that's broke out that is an amazing tool that I'm not sure why everybody's not using it. It really does help you to be able to look at your documentation in a way, and you don't have to sit there and do the math, because the Excel spreadsheet will do the math for you and tell you if people have choice. You do not have a housing log. We will make sure you have access to it when we send out the documentation. It's going to go to everybody who's here. And it's important that when you get this link to, because it's in Pathways, I believe, when you get the link to Pathways, you will have to go in there and look for the documentation, but there is an Excel spreadsheet that is amazing and will do some of this work for you, or you can give it to whoever's doing your Fidelity review, and they can look at it and go, God, this is easy. All I got to do is look at this and it has all the information in one spot. So I see a few people requesting that, Kimberly, but I figure we send it out to everybody or let them all know how to get to it. But that document makes your life a lot easier, and it makes the life of the person doing the Fidelity review, it makes their life a lot easier. All right. So that's how we score 1. Now we're at 2, dimension 2. And I'm trying to think, we go for another 26 minutes, I believe. So we have another session tomorrow that will continue this. And I'm going to actually show you the actual spreadsheet that has all of this information on it, because you don't have to remember this. You're not going to remember this. I've been doing this for a long time. So for me, it's all in my head. I don't expect it to be in everybody's head. For dimension 2 is the separation of housing and services. So you can get a 1, meaning that it's a mess and everybody's doing everybody else's job. There is no separation. You could get a 2.5. Well, there's some separation, but there's not total separation. Or you can get a 4. There's total separation. The housing specialist is the housing specialist, and the landlord is the landlord. Each of those you get a score. You only get 1 score in this situation because we're looking at your program. Are you separate or are you together with property management? So this one's easy to score because you don't have multiple scores to look at. It's either going to be a 1 or 2.5 or a 4 for this first part. Then the second part is, does the service provider collect rents? This is just checking to make sure that the service provider is not providing property management functions. If they're not, that's a 4. If they are doing some of it, that's a 2.5. If there's no separation, pretty much whoever gets to it first is doing it, that's a 1. And then we also want to know, is the service provider have an office located in the housing? We want the service provider to not be located within the housing. If the service providers are located in the housing, then it's more than likely going to be a 1. If they're not located in the housing, it's going to be a 4. You add these 3 scores up together, divide by 3, you get your score for dimension 2. Hopefully that made sense.
Can I ask why you don't want that? Because like our property manager has an office here and is here 1 day a week. So they have a computer and can do their work here.
Well,
What's the purpose?
the property manager can be in the building.
Oh, okay.
We don't want the service staff in the building.
Oh. So like program manager shouldn't
The
be in the building.
well, or the people, the housing specialist shouldn't be or having an office in the same place where people live. If they are, then it's going to reduce your score. It's not that big of a deal if that's the only place where you lose a couple of points. But if the service provider is in the building with the clients, then that will reduce your score. Because basically it's not necessarily housing, it's more of a program. If you're in the building with the tenants, if they can just run down to your office anytime, day or night, and there's staff there, then you're not helping to make them independent.
So if our funder says you have to have 24-hour staff here,
It's fine. You can have 24-hour staff there. You still will get a point or two reduced off of your score, but it's, again, nobody's going to get a perfect score. If you're only missing those that 1.5 points, you're fine. It's not going to affect your fidelity. So like I said, nobody's ever going to get a perfect score. If you're only missing 2 points and you get a 26, you are doing a great program. I mean, nobody's gonna frown on getting a 26. Or even if you get a 24, that's still a great program. So you have some play in here to lose some points. So if your score is really low, it's because you're missing points in a lot of dimensions.
Pat, can I jump in just for a second?
Sure.
So Donna, situations like permanent supportive housing buildings with certain requirements are going to have to take hits in certain areas. And I can speak that, your agency gets to decide what they have control over and can improve upon fidelity, and then what they might have to take hits on because of funding or the setting. And honestly, most PSH buildings do have certain dimensions that they just have to take hits on because of how it's run or what the model is. So just know that, and also know that your agency works really hard to reach fidelity. So if you have questions, you can reach out to myself or somebody like Danny that works with you that may be able to explain what they've chosen to do in your agency to try to meet fidelity.
Yeah, and really, I mean, this dimension, you can only lose. I mean, even if you get a 1, you're only missing 3 points on this dimension. So even if you weren't even having separation of services and property management, you would still get a 1. That's missing 3 points. The thing is, here's the key to doing this, to doing permanent supportive housing and being in fidelity. You have to know your program. So whoever the manager of the program is, they have to know, okay, if we make this building and we're gonna do this building because it's an easy way for us to do our housing program, we're gonna have everybody living in this building, we're willing to take the hits, but it's because this is gonna make our life easier. The thing you have to do as the manager of that program is make sure that you're not taking hits in every dimension. So the dimensions you have full control over, like getting the leases, getting copies of leases, you should have all of that. You should have, everything, every place you can get the full 4, you want to get the full 4 because you're going to be taking hits in a couple of dimensions. It's not that big of a deal, people. You are not going to get a perfect score. All you want to do is the first fidelity, you're getting a score, it's your baseline. The second score that you get on your second fidelity, what we would like to see is that score going up a little or it going up some. We're looking at continuous improvement. You get to work on your programs. You get to make changes. You get to take the feedback that you're getting from the reviewers and go, oh, well, okay, we lost 3 points on this dimension, but we probably could have only lost 1.5 if we do this. Those are the kind of decisions that the program managers of permanent supportive housing programs have to do, is looking at their program and knowing what the fidelity says you need to do and making decisions about, okay, if we lose 3 points here, we're good with that. But every other dimension, we're gonna get the points, or we're gonna at least get, you know, close to a 4. You're still in great shape. So don't, when I talk about losing points, don't sweat it that much. Where you need to sweat is if you, at the end of this training, you go, we're gonna lose points in every damn dimension. Then you got a little something to worry about. That means that we need to, you probably want to get a fidelity review and get a sense of what you can make changes to, so you can change your program to get it to be better. Because what we know is people, agencies who get a higher fidelity score are having more success housing people. So if you get a low score, but yet you're doing a great job of housing people, then we got to take a look at what's going on. Like, you're doing a great job housing people, but your score is low. That we don't usually see that. What we usually see is higher scores mean better outcomes. And again, that's why this is an evidence-based practice, because we know if people do this and get on the higher side of the score, that their program is going to have good reviews. I mean, have good results, good outcomes. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't want people to be panicking yet, because we're nowhere done with this. and I'm gonna make sure you have time for questions, and we can go through different scenarios. So just hold on tight. It's gonna be all right. So dimension 3, decent, safe, and affordable housing. This is a little bit more complicated to score. But if you have that housing sheet or that Excel spreadsheet, easy. But this one is every person in your program gets a score based on their rent. So for instance, you get a 4 if I'm your tenant, Pat, I'm your tenant. If I'm paying 30% of my income or less for rent, my score is a 4. If I am paying 31% to 40% of my income for rent, my score goes down to a 3. If I am paying 41% to 50% for rent, my score goes down to a 2. If I am paying 50% or more for rent, it goes down to a 1. Now remember, people get to choose. I've had participants pick to live in the place that they had to pay 50% of their income for rent. That is what they wanted. I am not going to say no to that person because it's going to affect my score. I'm going to be like, of course, you move to wherever you want to move to. But even having a few of those people is not going to take your score down that much. Now, if you have everybody's paying 50% of their income for rent, then yeah, that'll take your score down. But if you only have a few people, and this becomes a game of numbers for all of you math people. Remember, if you are averaging out 5 scores, that's a big difference than averaging out 50 scores. Because this is where every tenant will get a score. And then you have to take all of those scores and add them up together and divide it by the total number of tenants. So say we have 50 tenants. Kimberly and her program has 50 tenants. We've given them all scores. So there are 50 scores. We add up those 50 scores, we divide it by 50. Kimberly's score for that dimension comes out to a 3.2567. Kimberly might not be happy, but to me, that's a good score. Because we looked at 50 people and you're still close to a 4, that's a good score. That means the majority of the people that you've helped find housing are not living too far above their means. You might have a couple of people who are, but most of them are not. To me, that's a good score. Then the other part of this score is, does the housing meet HUD's HQS or housing quality standards? That is either a 1, no it doesn't, or there was never one done. That it could be a 2.5, meaning some of the housing, some are meeting it, some are not. Or it could be a 4. Every place is meeting those standards. You take the scores that you get from both of those, you combine them, you add them up together, and you divide it by 2, and that's your score for this dimension. Does that make sense? So I'm gonna stop talking. And I wanna see, we have about 10 more minutes. I want to see if you have questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, or thoughts, or give me some feedback. What are you thinking? If you want to come off mute, feel free to come off mute and talk to me. But I wanted to just have this last 10 minutes to give you a chance to digest and ask questions, or to sit there and go, this is a lot.
So our housing program over here, supportive housing for Pierre Washington, like particularly Pierre Kent, has been literally running for a year, and the first 6 months was building caseloads. And I have been on edge wondering about Fidelity, and we're just kind of, all of our peers come in, we're a peer support agency.
No, I think that's great.
Yeah, I love that, that we're not necessarily clinical, so we don't have all those things, but it feels like the first 6 months of working with somebody that they, most of our folks are unhoused, and it's like just getting them stable. And I'm wondering how that plays into Fidelity, like with, basically we're trying to get you possibly into a shelter so I can come get you from the shelter, go look for housing, whatever it might be. But it's been it's not a quick process, and I'm just wondering sometimes if that's right, or other agencies are doing it quicker, or I don't know,
I don't think you're by yourself. What I would be curious about is how long what's your average length of how long it takes to find somebody housing?
So it
And it-
seems about 6 months in.
Mhm.
And I'm talking no identification, no documentation, some people don't even have like foods, food benefits.
Mhm.
Sometimes we start where they don't even have medical,
Mhm.
and we don't even start the assessment process. So we get you your medical and
Right.
and all that stuff. So it's been I'm seeing stuff turn in about 6 months, maybe longer, but I can only judge off of our agency and how we do it. I don't really talk to other FCS people.
One of my follow-up questions would be, do you have staff out there building relationships with landlords? Do you have landlords on board? And is the biggest obstacle is just getting people's information, getting their documentation? If that's the case, I would also be curious, have you found ways to like try to speed up that process, or, have you looked at out of the box, outside the box ideas about how do we get this documentation for people? If you're doing all of that and it's taking 6 months and you're doing everything you possibly can and it's being documented, then
Yeah.
you're doing what you can do.
Yeah.
I mean,
it depends on the individual. To be honest, sometimes the motivation, maybe I've spent 2 months in crisis in the beginning of this,
Yeah.
So, for us, it really, we walk alongside, we don't force, we don't,
Yeah.
push or anything like that,
Well,
yeah.
Kimberly is anxious to say something. So Kimberly.
Yeah, I just want to remind folks to reach out to the other locations that you may have. So Colette, Pierce, Seattle literally just went through a Fidelity review. So be reaching out to the other locations that may have gone through this or may have some ideas about what they're doing, and really talk about, processes and think about how they got to where they reached Fidelity or where they're at in Fidelity. So you guys can maybe work together, because, all of your locations are providing FCS now. So if you FCS folks meet and can start talking about Fidelity as kind of a conversation, you guys might be able to come together to figure out what's different about where you're doing your services compared to like King County or Spokane, but also, come to an idea of what your agency is willing to take hits on and what you're not. Those kinds of things would be a really important discussion as you guys move forward with Fidelity. And then I'd be happy to meet with you on the side, Colette, and talk about this as well.
That would be amazing. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you got some great staff there in Washington State, and Kimberly and Rayanne are going to be there to support you. So if you're having these type of struggles, feel free to reach out to one of them to say, look, I think we're doing all we can do, but maybe you have some different answers or some different thoughts and can help us. But but nobody's gonna know unless you reach out for help. And once you reach out for help, then they can be, helping you as much as possible and giving you some feedback. Because this is not an easy job, people. When I got into housing, I thought it was gonna be much easier than it was. And it is not easy. It is a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get to harness when people are motivated. See, that's the other thing. People might be motivated when they come to you, but after 6 months, that motivation might not be there anymore. And that's also something you have to think about is, are we helping people stay motivated to get into this housing, or are we losing that motivation because it's taking us so long? And is there another way to deal with this? Maybe one of the answers might be to, try to partner with some of these agencies who provide this documentation, or find a person you can always go to in that agency that knows you've built a relationship, and they can, maybe cut off a few days here. But it's really not easy. And when I'm talking to you, I know it's not easy. I'm not sitting back thinking, piece of cake. You can do this with your eyes closed. What I think a lot of times is people get into this field thinking it's going to be easy, that landlords are going to be like, sure, we trust you, bring them over here. It's never that. That's never or rarely the case. And the landlords who say bring them over here sometimes are slumlords, and you don't want to work with them. It is not an easy job. And it's not easy going out building relationships with landlords.
So I always go with our peers off-site. We go together, we visit different apartments, we talk to the leasing agents. I explain what I do. And that's been usually the only way for me to be successful housing people, is that face-to-face interaction. I've had good luck with that.
You have to have face-to-face, because that is, with landlords, if you try to do this virtually, you are just one of many. And it's that going in face-to-face, talking to them, looking them in the eye, understanding where they're coming from, and talking about what it is that you're willing to do. What I would suggest, Colette, is at some point getting your peers to be able to do this without you having to go with them every time. So at some point you might say, okay, we're going to go out, but this time you're going to do more of the talking and I'm going to listen. Because you got to get their expertise up, because that could be also holding you back, because you're one person. How can you be out there with everybody? You can't. And that's going to slow down the process. So, taking a look at your infrastructure, how are you doing this? If you have to go out with everybody, that could be part of the problem. That you need to get your staff trained in being able to go out there and do this without you. And then you can be doing other things. And a lot of times that comes up in the Fidelity review, where the Fidelity reviewer will be like, whoa, part of your problem is you have to go out for everybody, Colette, and it's one of you. And why aren't you training your staff to do this?
Yeah, we just hired a new housing, so.
No, I get it,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying that's the kind of stuff that we look at.
For sure. Thank you.
Somebody asked, is there an FCS cap on how many participants a housing professional can have? When you say that, Heidi, are you talking about caseload size, or are you talking about for the agency, is there a cap on how many the agency can have? Or are you talking about caseloads for individual housing specialists? Okay, I'm not seeing a response. So anyway, we're at time. We're going to pick this back up tomorrow. And we're going to, on individual. You'll find out tomorrow, Heidi. Or if you can't wait till tomorrow, you can go to the Permanent Supportive Housing Toolkit at SAMHSA and get that information. But if we're going to talk about it tomorrow. I didn't forget that question. Okay. All right, everybody, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. Come back with lots of questions. Try to stump me. Try to give me a question I don't have the answer to.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.